people could turn their cameras back on just to show if they are actually trustees or not of a charity. So that's 1, 2, 3, 4. Fine. Okay, that's good. Okay, thanks very much indeed. So I will now share the screen. Hopefully the technology will work. And also, can everyone hear me okay? So,
yes, you're fine, Jonathan. We can hear you.
That's great. Thank you. Okay. So to get straight into this, the role of this presentation is just really to go through, in effect, what trustees' responsibilities as far as their charities fundraising should go, and maybe review what you could or should be doing to support your fundraisers in what they're trying to do for you. So certainly the public's expectation of charities varies, but there's a very clear one from the Charity Commission themselves, which is basically an expectation that they're driven by purpose and they live the values and they hold themselves to high standards, and that they are custodians, quite nicely said, of something much bigger than themselves. The trouble is, though, that public perception has shifted over the years, and we have this point that, again, the Charity Commission raised a few years ago about this gap between expectations of what charities are and what and the attitude and behaviour that the public see of the charities in front of them. Clear examples of that is where we're not helping, as a sector, we're not helping ourselves by getting involved with scandals that make themselves onto the front pages of newspapers around the country. Whether it's inadvertent use of public cash or criminal use of public cash or sexual scandals, particularly with the overseas aid sector, and then of course the perception that, again, they're helping themselves. The charities, chief executives being paid too much, or that there's the costs involved in raising the money don't actually get passed on to the other charitable causes themselves. And of course, the big one with Captain Tom Foundation, which is a classic instance of public perception of a charity fatally undermined by the actions of the people running the charity, which leads to a general sense of, well, okay, do people really still trust the charity sector? Now, of course, they should, but the Commission, again, came up with some fairly perceptive views in terms of what the public is seeing. An organisation is focused on growth and expansion, possibly counter to the interests of the people they're supposed to be helping. So we've got a bit of a problem there in terms of how charities, and therefore how they go about raising their money, is perceived. But at the same time, this perception seesaws a bit. On one level, you've got Tina Stoll, the previous chair of the Charity Commission, saying basically charities are no more trusted by the British public than a stranger on the street. And yet at the same time, other surveys, slightly more recently published, suggesting that actually public trust in charities is actually at its highest level. There's a circle to be squared here somewhere, but I think there's been some additional studies that might actually help explain that. Now, the thing is, of course, how does the charity sector perceive itself? Now, clearly that people think the bigger and international charities are more worthy of scrutiny and therefore more worthy of criticism, whilst local charities, of which I'm assuming most of you belong to, are less likely to be criticised. I don't know if that's correct or not, but at the same time, certain news media will have a particular view of charities that they'll stick to, whilst others will not. But there's also this issue of how the Charity Commission, or rather how the charity sector sees the Charity Commission. Rather than seeing it as a supportive organisation, it's their as a sort of a judge, as it were. These were a review taken on by New Philanthropy Capital a couple of years ago. But there's also this interesting thing that, again, sort of came up with most charities believing that over the next 5 years, government will value charities in terms of service and not for their campaigning role. And lo and behold, everyone's been reading their papers recently. You have Wes Streeting making exactly that point, where he's saying, in effect, this culture of lobbying by the voluntary sector is intrusive to actually supporting the NHS, focusing on the issues that matter. Now, clearly, the sector has fought back because, of course, there's a balance to be struck. But at the same time, we do have this tension that then grows between what the charity sector perceives itself as being for, the Charity Commission sees the sector as being for, and then how government and the public see the sector. So, as I say, there's a circle to be squared. Set against that, we have the issue of actual fundraising for charities. Now, you've got the idea that the public sector is saying, well, look, hang on, we can't keep funding charities to fill all of our service gaps at the rate that they need. We don't have the resource to do it. At the same time, which is a major problem for charities to consider, because they're going to have to look at other sources of income to support that. But again, here they are reporting just a few days ago, being very optimistic about sort of the fundraising climate, all of which then must be of some considerable interest to trustees. Because there's also, of course, the fundraising regulator, which sits alongside the Charity Commission. And again, we can do a sort of a quick survey at the end of how many of you are actually signed up with the fundraising regulator. But it's published a very interesting study on the public's experience of fundraising that also highlights their expectations of charitable fundraising. And this goes back to that point about public trust in the sector being at its highest level for years, just a bit earlier. So one of the sort of more concerning elements of that, though, was this sense of overall trust in charity fundraisers. Now you'll see there's sort of a nicely balanced element of those that don't trust charities at all, full stop, 16%, and then 15% saying, yes, we trust charities no matter what. But there's a very large group in the middle where they're sort of saying, well, maybe, but not all of them. So again, what is it that's driving that? Well, one of the issues is face-to-face fundraising. So you have this would be either in the street or doorstepping, which people have historically found a bit challenging. And it's something that I think the sector does need to address. Another element of the uncertainty is prompted by a lack of trust that is driven by sort of concerns over as a sector's transparency, with whether it's financial, in terms of where the money's going that they're raising, but also the perception that comes through negative reporting in the media on corruptions and other scandals. Now, what they've done as a result of this research is produce some interesting points, some points of useful interest, certainly for trustees, just saying, well, okay, what could the sector to do, to improve that degree of trust? And leading, obviously, the way was transparency. How the gifts are being used, knowing that the charity is regulated, knowing that our personal data is secure, and so on. They have a nice little commercial for themselves in the middle here, knowing that the charity is registered with the fundraising regulator. I've yet to meet a donor who has ever raised that with me, but nevertheless, that was among the points. But the steps they suggest are definitely worthy of consideration. And they've come up with a hit list of activities that charities should undertake to make sure that that trust is repaired. and these can be circulated later, so I'm not going to read through them at all. So what does it all come down to? Well, more to the point, who does it all come down to? And the question really is, well, is it your charity's fundraising team, or is it maybe your charity's leadership team? Well, not that either. Really, it's down to you as trustees. And you are the ultimate people holding the responsibility for everything that your charity does. And the fundraising regulator and the charity commission and others, they would come knocking on your door, not necessarily your fundraising team's door, if anything goes wrong. So what's expected of you as trustees? For instance, because the charity commission will very clearly lay this out for you. But you need to ask yourselves, do you have an explicit role in fundraising for your charity, either an executive or supervisory role? Now, the Charity Commission have laid out some very helpful guidance on this, and it's available online, and there's work in considerable detail. But they make the point that as one of the most visible aspects of a charity's work, and it's just as much of a front window to the charity as its marketing. Fundraising activity can shape opinion, so it needs to embody the values of your charity and set the tone for your public image and brand. A lot of organizations will feel that the brand drives everything, but it's not really. It's the activities in raising money for the brand that will really shape opinion. So as a trustee, you need to ensure that your charity has an appropriate approach to fundraising and that it's meeting its legal and ethical responsibilities, which are laid out very helpfully in this document from the Charity Commission. I mean, I think it is part of that sort of requirement that you must, as a trustee, have this degree of direct interest in both the national guidance on overseeing fundraising activity and also what your charity does, not just in terms of what your own sort of teams are doing, but also any third-party agencies or agents that you're using to raise money for you as well. Because again, the line of responsibility comes right back to you. So there are a number of principles that the Charity Commission have laid out in terms of your fundraising. So this is really about planning, making sure that you and your co-trustees are agreeing, setting and then monitoring your charity's overall approach to fundraising. And your fundraising plan should also take account of risks, your charity's values and its relationship with donors, as well as the wider public, as well as its income needs and expectations. You've got to supervise your fundraisers. Okay, they are in most cases the professionals, but at the same time, you need to have systems in place to oversee what the fundraisers are doing. Anything that they're carrying out for your charity is in your name. So you need to be satisfied that it is and remains in your charity's best interests. It means delegating responsibly so that your charity's in-house and volunteer fundraisers and any connected companies, those third-party agents I was talking about, know what's expected of them. And if you employ a commercial partner to raise funds for your charity, the arrangement has got to be in the charity's best interests and comply with any specific legal standards and that apply. There's also protecting your charity's reputation, as well as the money and other assets. And that means ensuring that there's a strong management of your assets and resources so that you can meet your legal trustee duty to act in your charity's best interests and to protect it from undue risk. And that includes ensuring that there's adequate consideration of the impact of your charity's fundraising on its donors and supporters and the public, making sure that you receive all the money to which it's entitled and taking steps to reduce the risk of loss or fraud. You've got to identifying and complying with laws and regulations that apply specifically to your charity's fundraising. And again, this is not something you hive off to other people in the charity. This is something that every trustee committee needs to be committed to. And it's very easy, in effect, to leave fundraising to the fundraisers, but this is absolutely one area where you have to be absolutely on the ball. this goes back to my point about recognizing the standards, whether it's ones associated with the fundraising regulator or by the Charity Commission themselves. But they're well laid out, but you must be familiar with them. And there's the point about being open and accountable. Again, when it comes to statutory reporting requirements on fundraising, and using the reporting to demonstrate that your charity is well run, and that your fundraising communications are, they explain your work, and they are, that the practice is ethical and transparent. So a number of sort of perceptions need to change, both sort of internally in terms of some funders' distaste for funding overheads, which is a major issue. And internally, trustees also need to recognise that not all fundraising is good, and they've got to understand how their charity goes about it. Also, the rather helpfully named Commission on the Donor Experience a few years ago set out a series of principles on fundraising to go alongside those that the Charity Commission and the fundraising regulator produced, that are again a helpful adjunct to what you need to address, particularly in terms of understanding your donors' experience of your charity's fundraising. If they have a great experience, they will come back for more. If they don't have a great experience, they won't. I mean, some things are as simple as that. But there's also this sort of principle that a donor-based approach, one that recognises in effect what the donors are looking for, is essential. There's also the point of fundraising needs to be a long-term activity in terms of your planning. You need to look at it as an investment, not a cost, and to be realistic in terms of the returns you expect from it. I'll go into the sort of the returns on investment a little bit later, but I think there just needs to be a recognition, and this is a frequent complaint of fundraisers about trustees, is that they will put forward a plan that is based on their previous experience, and the trustees will say, well, that's not ambitious enough, or this needs to happen quicker because we're up against a deadline, without really recognizing that actually you're going to need to trust their judgment in terms of what's achievable, but you need to scrutinize how they go about it. So in terms of what's actually expected of fundraisers, again, the fundraising regulator has come up with a very helpful code of practice for how fundraisers go about their work. And again, the principle of it is underlined with these sort of 5 promises that in effect any fundraiser must take in terms of high standards, transparency, respect, fairness, and accountability. But the principle of that is you register with the fundraising regulator, you display their badge on your publications and on your any online presence, and in effect you are committing to upholding a standard. So the combination of that and the Charity Commission's advice should be important documents that all trustees should have access to, and in effect use that to then help run the charity better. Now, okay, so for trustees, so far as that, as far as supervision and accountability is concerned, that's all well and good. But what do you as trustees do to help that fundraising? Does your team run an introduction to fundraising briefing for new trustees? Most charities I've worked for do not. There's simply an expectation that the trustees roll up, make decisions on in meetings, whether it's budgets, whether it's the projects that you're sending your fundraisers out, and that's all it is. But you need to have much more of an understanding of how your charity is going about doing its fundraising. So, do trustees have an explicit role Do you know what the charity is doing to raise the income? Who do you raise your money from? Do you have that clear understanding? And also, when you get to it, fundraising as an item on most trustee meetings is usually second last item on the agenda, and it's always rushed because they've always been talking about principles and projects and whatever, and you never really get a sort of a proper bite at that particular cherry. And that includes having an opportunity to interrogate the fundraising team, but also to have a much more active role in defining the fundraising policy stroke strategy for the charity. So again, this comes back to how much of an understanding of the organization's fundraising strategy do you have? And how do, in effect, how do you challenge it? Because of course, without all of that other knowledge that we've just been talking about in terms of the degree of regulation that's around fundraising, how do you know what to challenge in terms of the strategy's approach? And are you asked to approve key fundraising decisions, whether it's a question of investment in a campaign, whether it's indeed as a campaign itself, or is it just a question of you're told it by your fundraising team and that's it? And then how regularly do the fundraisers talk to the trustees outside formal trustee meetings? Do you proactively try and set up sessions with them? Do they with you? You are there as an advice resource. You're there as a someone to bounce ideas off. But to what degree do the fundraising team do that? I would suggest it's worth taking a proactive approach as a trustee and, in effect, go out and about and talk to them. Which again goes back to my point about connection with them. I mean, does the fundraising team actually ask for help, or do they just think, actually, no, we can get on with it? If they do ask for help, what do they ask for help with? So, in terms of what trustees can do to help, I would suggest there's a number of things you could do institutionally. One of which is maybe, but obviously with small charities, this is possibly unrealistic. But at the same time, you may want to think about it, establishing a small subcommittee that's focused on fundraising, or maybe even an external fundraising committee made up of volunteers who want to help you fundraise, and maybe have it responsible for looking at all income sources for the charity, not just public fundraising, for instance. Now, the idea is that it helps you understand how your fundraising strategy has evolved. It gives you an opportunity to sort of contribute to it. But there's also this point of ensuring that not all your eggs are in the one basket. I mean, this is an analysis of, in effect, a classic charity's income on the basis of, this was some years ago, the study was done, but in effect, it's looking at 18.2 billion pounds worth of funding for 164,000 charities, and in effect, averaging out what the sources of income were. And obviously, you've got direct marketing, legacies, and the rest. But not forgetting that legacies are not necessarily fundraised income unless you've got a dedicated legacy program that involves a degree of investment. But the point being that a mixed basket of income will tide you through rough times. Obviously, there'll be times when corporate fundraising does particularly well, and then it ties off a bit because there's a recession on, and maybe other forms of giving step up from events or whatever. But the point being that your role as trustees is to make sure that basket of currencies, as it were, for want of a better word, is one that you stick to, because the number of charities that are wholly reliant on local authority income are facing something of a cliff edge at the moment as local authority incomes lessen, as the range of their responsibilities is growing. So you need to be attuned to that and be either advocating for increased diversification of income, or indeed actually participating in that yourself. At the heart of it, though, you've got to decide what you can afford to do and what's most likely to respond to your cause, and that will only come through discussion with your fundraising team and their understanding of the audiences that you're speaking to. So, in terms of how you can help as a trustee, clearly you need to look at the prospect lists that they're putting together, and this is a point that I can't emphasize enough. Whenever you're in any conversations with fundraisers, you need to get them to give you a very clear sense of who they've got in play, who's in the strategy for the months ahead. Get a chance to review the decision makers of those with your fundraisers to see if you've got any connection with them. I mean, as a mature trusts program could be generating £10 for every pound you spend, probably more, with a hit rate of something like 1 in 7. It's a research intensive operation, but it's one that can be very rewarding. Apart from the fact that just recent stories are coming from a number of foundations that have temporarily closed their giving programs because of the scale of demand. So it's worth pursuing, but at the same time, the landscape in this area of fundraising is not quite as easy as it was. There's also obviously fundraising from corporates, which you could be producing something like £4 for every pound spent. There's obviously a mass industry in charities of the year, which the smaller charities will always complain about being pushed out by the bigger charities, which have whole departments devoted to securing charities of the year around the country. But it's still worth engaging with your local corporate sector, because localism does stand for quite something in fundraising. And also, what you do affects your local community, and your local community and your corporate community are one and the same. So you do need to build those connections. If your fundraisers aren't actually volunteering the information about who or where they're approaching, you need to ask for it, though. If you work in a company yourself, you need to think about what you can do to promote your cause within that, and maybe with corporate colleagues locally as well. In terms of individual donors, this is a very varied market. I mean, there are areas where you obviously can influence, but in most cases, particularly with the growth of digital over direct mail, there's little you can do to actually help it beyond, in effect, understand the strategy behind what they're intending, making sure that they have sufficient resource behind them to do it properly, but also to make sure that the fulfillment side of it, in terms of the connection with the donor once they've made their gift, is of a high quality, because it goes back to the point about transparency, how the gift is going to be used, but also people feeling that they've been thanked properly. Mid-value giving is something of a Cinderella in the sector at the moment, but again, it relies on an understanding of your donors and their potential. This goes back to my point about sort of interrogating your fundraisers about who they have in mind, who they have as prospects. How do they segment them? How are they intending to approach them? And then, of course, you have the area of major donors, which the charity sector they've been trying to wake up to for the last 25 years, I'd say. But this is an area where you're looking at individual philanthropists, and that's very much based on who do you know and how well do you know them? And what do you reckon they're capable of doing to support you? And this is an area where I think the trustee's assistance with the fundraising team is of paramount importance, whether it's in helping cultivate them, whether it's in terms of just thanking them or keeping them involved in what the charity is trying to do. I mean, with this, you'd be looking at a return on investment of, I mean, maybe £10 for every £1 you spend. But it's a long-term process. Mass fundraising, particularly through digital, is a comparatively simple sort of calculation in terms of you put this amount of money in, you're going to get this amount of money out. With major donors, you're looking at building relationships with individuals that could take as long as 18 months to bear any kind of fruit. So they're quite a long slog, but they are, as it were, a strategic source of funding, because, of course, they will have a capacity to give that the majority of donors won't. So it's usually sort of worth it in the long term. But establishing a major donor operation for most charities is, at the moment, it seems to be sort of where they assign part-timers to it, and wait to see how it's going to grow. I can recall in my time working at Cambridge, we were getting something like £13 for every pound spent. So as an ROI, that is spectacular, but that was in exceptional circumstances. But at the same time, it is a high value long-term prospect for fundraising that trustees can genuinely make an impression on. In terms of what you can offer as a trustee personally, think about how you can maybe volunteer to assist with fundraising, and what form could that take. Clearly, speaking at events or visiting a prospective donor would be among the easier things to do. Both of these would be in partnership with your fundraising teams. But the clear thing is that you're maybe working to their brief, but you're adding that extra degree of authority, for want of a better word, to that ask. And going on the point of asking, I mean, what are you doing to help secure sponsorship or patrons? I mean, are you looking at potential company partners around the locality who you think a personal connection with them could help secure a sponsorship, or indeed local local sort of figures to act as patrons, possibly. And then maybe bringing your own contacts to an event. A fairly unpressured way of getting your contacts involved in something, but at least you are adding something to the charity's audience, and it may prove to develop into a healthy relationship. And then, of course, there's the issue of you yourself making a gift to the charity. I mean, certainly with every charity I've worked with, I think trustees have been encouraged to give, but not required to give. Although when you set up maybe a campaign board of trustees, there's very much an expectation that every trustee will give. My personal view is that every trustee should be a donor to their charity, because then you can ask for money on the basis of having given money, and that always does go down well with donors. And in terms of what else you could offer personally, I'd clearly attending external meetings, if just to provide an extra facet to explaining the charity's work to prospective donors. Getting involved in donor stewardship, whether it's writing thank you letters, calls to your donors, writing Christmas cards and the like. Then also social media, contributing to your charity's own profile raising through your own through your own social media presence as well. And again, that goes down to sharing news with your sort of Twitter, Facebook, LinkedIn profiles as well. I mean, it's easy stuff to do. It doesn't take very much time, but it does spread the reach of what your charity is trying to do. I've seen some where trustees have made their own personal videos and put those up on social media that just talks about why they volunteer and what your charity's impact is, which can be very effective. I think the thing also is that both for you and your fundraisers, there's a lot of support out there for how you go about doing your fundraising work ethically and effectively. Clearly, obviously, there's the Charity Commission itself. It publishes annual research into the perception of the public trust in charities to help guide you. But there's a lot of practical help and documentation available for charity trustees. Well, obviously relating to every aspect of their work as trustees, but there's a particularly large body of work around fundraising. You've also got areas like the Chartered Institute of Fundraising, which I would encourage you to encourage your fundraisers to join. For a start, it's an extraordinary network, a national network of fundraisers from a whole raft of charities of every conceivable size, here from the big leviathans like Cancer Research UK down to sort of local friends organisations. But the training that they offer, the conferences, the publications, all help. Now, in an ideal world, as trustees, you might want to think about paying your fundraisers subscription to this. And it's a professional membership organisation. The monthly costs are really quite minimal, but you might want to consider that. In terms of the free advice, sadly, we've lost the Small Charities Coalition in the last couple of years, which was both an advocate but also a useful sounding board. But sadly, that went the way of all small charities, or many small charities, after COVID. Much of its work has been taken over now by the NCVO, the National Council of Voluntary Organisations, which obviously is there to support charities. But at the same time, it's a paid-for subscription. There's very little for free from NCVO. So I'd suggest maybe looking at alternative, other options, such as Sophie, which is it's the showcase of fundraising, innovation, and imagination, which has been running now for, upwards of 30 years, maybe more, where in effect it's just littered with examples of good practice in fundraising, which will hopefully inspire your fundraisers to try new things, or better still, try stuff that's worked. Sometimes it combines the two, but it's a very, very helpful source of information. It has an annual conference called "I Wish I'd Thought of That," that is always great fun as well. But I'd definitely suggest looking at that. There's also, of course, UK Fundraising, which has been running for over 30 years now, run by the estimable Howard Lake. So fundraising.co.uk, it's got news, ideas, as they say, and is a really helpful resource that you as trustees should look at from time to time as well, because you'll see a sense of trends, new ideas that worked, new ideas that didn't work, and so on. Probably about one of the best resources, though, in terms of being free, is Charity Excellence. Now, degree of vested interest, I used to be chair of their trustees until a couple of years ago, but helped set them up with Ian McClintock, an ex-colleague of mine. But this is an extraordinarily powerful free resource that will give advice on not just fundraising, but on sort of virtually any aspect of running a foundation or indeed a charity. But the fundraisers, there are free lists available of funders with particular special interests. Obviously, the Director of Social Change will publish the Director of Grant-Making Trusts, as will the Charities Aid Foundation, but what Charity Excellence provide is all free. At the same time, they are increasingly AI powered, so you just need to click on one of those tech bunnies and ask it any question, and it will come back with links to the relevant websites or actual advice on the topic that you're looking for. So there's a lot out there, both for you to push your fundraisers towards, but also material that's out there that's worth you looking at as well. Now, at the same time, we recognise that in this sector nobody's perfect. So I was rather amused some years ago to find that the ICO actually admitted that their own website hadn't actually complied with GDPR. So I think the message there is be prepared to forgive yourselves for anything going wrong, but at least you have with these the tools to start putting it right. Now, I'm aware I've probably rushed that quite a bit, but at the same time, I'd be very happy to take any questions you might have.
Jonathan, thank you very much. If you could take down the share, that will be helpful. And please do put your cameras back on, everybody. It's good to see people. And Jonathan, that's been very full in the information that you've been given, and a lot of information, and nobody has been busy typing in the chat with questions. So I don't know, we're not such a large group that we can't talk to each other. I do talk about, just using the chat if we had, many people on the screen. But Jonathan, one of the things I was conscious of in your presentation, that we are across Northamptonshire and across Northamptonshire, a range of size of organisations, and where you're talking about your fundraising team, it could be one person who's the who's the chief exec or the manager of a project, and indeed they could be a volunteer themselves with a small community organisation they're developing. But I think the principles still stand strong, don't they, in terms of integrity?
I think that's what I was trying to sort of push, in that no matter whether you are CRUK or the Friends of Kettering Art Gallery and Museum, you still have to adhere to the same standard in terms of how you go about your fundraising, and also, the Charity Commission's view is that ignorance is no excuse in terms of the regulations around fundraising. So that as any trustee, they must have that understanding of how either they or their organisation goes about its fundraising.
Indeed, and we've just got a couple of points in the chat there. Jess, yes, we will be sharing the slides. Also, this recording will go onto the Aspire NN website, as well as the slide deck as well. And Matthew asked, does the chair, secretary and treasurer automatically have the same type of responsibilities as a trustee?
Well, yes, they do, because as far as the commission are concerned, they are trustees. I mean, even if they're not actually sort of an executive officer of a trustee, if they are, as it were, on its executive committee, they are, unless they're sort of a paid employee, then they're a trustee.
Indeed, and I think often that a challenge to us as trustees and involved in the not-for-profit sector, I often use the term, how could this possibly go wrong? And an answer to that is that if you have your policies and procedures in place and you follow them, you support your people, you ask questions, you're active, then that mitigates about the potentials of how can things go wrong, because the more eyes that are on things, the more transparency there is in how you act, and that's fundamental within your fundraising activity. You protect yourselves, don't you?
That's exactly it. That's exactly it. Yeah. I mean, reputation is one of those areas that you can lose your reputation in an afternoon by something badly going wrong, and unless you're well, I mean, you need to sort of do everything in effect to protect yourselves, and in effect that understanding of the regulations, and indeed around the principles attached to fundraising.
Yes,
the better.
Thank you. Yes.